Live every day as if it were the last, because before you know it, time goes past and life's just not that long. Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if you do, they might not know, and one day we'll all be gone. Taste the wind, don't let it blow on by. Sing songs of love, let the music.
I dedicate today's program to my beloved friend Roberto, who died at 31 in 1999. Roberto was not his given name, but I called him Roberto. He suffered hell in his life. His mother was addicted to heroin. She disappeared when Roberto was in 6th grade. Probably she was murdered, but as far as I know, her body was never found. Roberto was sent to live with his uncle, who beat him and had sex with him. Crazy making, to have the same person beat your body and have sex with you. And sadly, that is what millions of women have suffered for thousands of years from their husbands or boyfriends, both beatings and sex from the same man. For many years, Roberto was severely addicted to sniffing spray paint, smoking cigarettes, to booze, and other drugs. And like many gay and bisexual men, Roberto felt torn inside between religion and his sex with men. Torn inside between his family and his sex with men. His family accepted his smoking cigarettes in slow suicide far better than his sex with men. The skies of Roberto's life were often dark and cloudy, but at moments the brilliant sunshine broke through. Roberto's tenderness, his affection, his tears. He shed tears of sorrow with me. He opened his heart in conversations with me. He shared his naked body with me. I mailed a photo of Roberto and my friend Steve, both naked in the photo, to my dad in Illinois. My mother had already died. Roberto and I often told each other, "I love you." And once he dedicated a beautiful Spanish song to me on KNW radio here in Albuquerque. He said, "To Don, my best friend, I love." He made other song dedications to me. I made song dedications to him. On my answering machine, he left the message, "I love you, hugs and kisses." He told me he looked at my photo when he masturbated. One time he said, "Think of me if you're masturbating or having sex." He told me he wished he could start his life over and grow up without drugs. And back then, I still cooked food. He called me from the emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital. He asked me to bring him some beans to eat. I took him beans. He kissed me and said, "I love you." And when he was in UNM hospital, I took him food. He kissed me outside when I left. In our last conversation by phone before he died, I'm so glad I told him, "I love you." And he said, "I love you too." And sometimes Roberto asked me to mention him on my TV program back in the 90s. I had a weekly TV program on this same station for 20 years, 1992 to 2012. My grave at San Jose de Armijo Cemetery on Arenal, on the west side of Albuquerque, is very close to Roberto's grave. Roberto died at 31 in 1999. I moved to Albuquerque in June 1970, over 52 years ago. I strongly oppose all war. I refused to go to Vietnam to mass murder those people in the Vietnam War. So I was allowed to do 2 years of community service, non-military community service, first in Arizona and then in Albuquerque. Some young people who may have damned war as much as I did, sadly did not know about doing community service instead of becoming U.S. soldiers to kill and to die. In the early 1970s, I met my dear friend Martina Tafoya here in Albuquerque. She lived in Martinez Town. She enjoyed my taking her and her young nephew, Johnny, to the guitar mass many times at San Felipe Church in Old Town. I sang in the choir. I drove my 61 Dodge, the only car I ever owned in my life. Martina said, if I have anything to say to anybody, I tell them to their face. That's usually a great way to live instead of being two-faced. Martina told me to bring over to her home anyone my heart desired. She enjoyed preparing a meal for guests, even though it took a long time because she walked slowly from disability. And one day when I visited Martina, 3 men came together into her house. One of them lived next door, worked in the city jail, and one of the other 2 pulled out a gun on me. Now, I don't know if it was loaded, and I sure as hell did not want to find out. Apparently, these 3 men thought that I, as a young white man, was somehow taking advantage of this Chicana, older woman. The man with the gun took off my glasses and my vest. He asked me, "Why are you acting so calm?" Well, inside I was not calm. I guess I was a good actor. Martina became very nervous. I was her friend. And these men were harassing me, threatening me in her home. She threw down her sugar bowl. She went up to the wall and started pounding her head against the wall. And she could have had a stroke or a heart attack. Finally, those 3 men left. I did not report this to the police. I did not want revenge from the men, to be shot in my head or have a tire shot out on my car. And for weeks afterward, when I came to pick Martina up, I parked on the street. I did not pull in her driveway, less chance of her next door neighbor man seeing me and giving me a hard time again. But one Sunday, I decided to drive in quicker because Martina walked slow, and I was then close to her door. Her neighbor man, one of the three men who had threatened me months before, came out, and I feared what he was going to say or do. But he said, "When you go to Mass today, pray for me." It was his way of apologizing to Martina and to me. A month later, when I ran for city council and lost, I came in number 9 out of 13. Martina told me that neighbor man had voted for me. Maybe that was the only time in Albuquerque's history when someone running for city office received a vote from someone who had before been in a group harassing and threatening the person, and he later apologized. Marriage is promising each other to be in love and make love with only each other until death do us part. Now, many people, of course, want to get married. So I speak now to you. If you're a woman and a man, if you're two women, if you're two men wanting to marry each other. And here are many questions for you to consider. Do you both want kids? If only one of you wants to have kids, what then? If both of you want kids, how many? Do you agree on how to raise kids? How differently were you both raised by your parents? Are you both opposed to hitting and cursing kids, regardless how difficult they may be at moments? Are you both religious? The same religion? If one of you is not religious, will you raise your kids to be religious or not? If you're in different religions, how will you decide which religion for your kids? If any of your kids come out gay, lesbian, bisexual, or trans, will you both be fully accepting? Do you both know and feel loved by each other's families? When you wrong each other, do you apologize or just sweep it under the carpet and pretend it never happened? Do you forgive? Many couples fight like crazy over money and bills. Does one of you enjoy living simply? Does the other want to buy crap that nobody needs? If so, do you want bank account together, or do you want to have separate bank or credit union accounts? Do you want to live in a small place or a mansion? Do you want to live in a low-income community with people of every color, or in an upper-income community of mostly white people? Does one of you need and want much more peace and quiet than the other? Much of the time, no TV, no radio, no music. Do you each stay up late or get up early? Do you both enjoy many visits from friends in your home? Is one of you much more neat, wanting the house to always look picture perfect? Does the other want the house to feel relaxed and lived in? Does one of you eat only healthy food and the other mostly junk food? Do either of you drink booze or use other drugs? Are you truthful with each other? Do you lie to each other about anything? Are you open about your past? Are either of you emotionally constipated and go for hours or even days shutting down and not wanting to talk? Is it hard for you to open up and show your feelings deeply? Do you each have longtime close friends? Are both of you or one of you committed to living fairly in our world family of 8 billion people? And as of now, are you both strongly attracted to each other? If sex is not important to both of you now, what if someday that changes for one of you? My dear friend Tom, a preacher who died many years ago, married a woman, and years later, after marriage, Tom realized his strong attraction to certain men. He and his wife stayed together, but she never fully accepted his sex with men. My friend Beverly knew before she married Frank that he was attracted to men. And that made it much better for both Beverly and Frank. But often one partner has not realized or has not accepted his or her attraction for persons of the same gender before marriage. If either of you see or meet someone you feel sexually attracted to, do you feel free to tell each other that you're attracted to that person, even if you do not have sex with the person you saw or met? Are you much more sexually attracted to other persons than you are to your partner? Do both of you enjoy cuddling together, naked and sober? Cuddling together, naked and sober, can be even more intimate than passionate sex. And sadly, many people, especially many men, are not comfortable with cuddling naked and sober. Are you or is your partner repressing big parts of who you are to stay together? Can you argue vigorously and still feel deeply connected? Do you realize you each have very mixed feelings about each other and your relationship? If either of you is starving sexually, are you turning to booze? If either of you is starving sexually, are you turning to gambling? Or hogging out on junk food? If either of you is starving sexually, romantically, are you fighting over stupid things or becoming workaholics? Have you each faced and gotten rid of the shame and guilt about sex about being naked with each other with the lights on? Are the shame and guilt you may have been taught as a child gone yet? Living together, married, under the same roof, often harms or destroys many friendships. Are either or both of you making big changes in how and how much you travel, how much you spend, consume, pollute to slow your part in the climate crisis? What about your politics? Nearly the same or very different? Where do you each stand on racism, white supremacy, justice, police brutality, U.S. wars? Before making a solemn vow to being romantic with only each other until one of you dies, try living together under the same roof for 6 months or a year to see how your relationship works. Is either of you very insecure and jealous? Do you prefer to sleep in the same bed or separate beds? If someday you separate, do you each refuse to blame it all on the other? Do you each refuse to see and speak about the other as a devil if you separate? How do you talk about your former girlfriends or boyfriends? Is there anything about yourself you're afraid to tell your partner? Is there any question you're afraid to ask your partner about his or her past life, their past relationships, their beliefs, their feelings? Do you both enjoy warmly hugging each other when alone or in public? If not, why not? Is passionate sex very important for one or for both of you? How often? If very important for only one of you, where does that leave your romantic relationship? If you both treasure passionate sex, do you tell each other exactly what turns you on and what turns you off in making love? Can you imagine a peaceful or a bitter separation and divorce if it comes to that? If either of you becomes severely disabled with dementia or whatever, no longer capable of sex, do you give your partner permission to have sex with someone else? I treasure passionate romance with men. I treasure hot, affectionate sex with lean, healthy men who have no shame, no guilt about sex with men. Men I'm attracted to and who are attracted to me. But I do not want to marry any man, no matter how much I'm in love with him, no matter how strongly attracted I am to him. I can be openly and deeply in love with more than one man at the same time. So I would feel trapped. I would feel caged. I would feel suffocating in marriage to just one man. I refuse to make this promise that I would later regret. I aim to tell the truth and not to make a foolish promise I would want to break. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak." What? Bullshit. Evil. But they're commanded to be under obedience, said the Apostle Paul. And he said, "Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection." He said, "I do not allow a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence." That's in the Bible. The Apostle Paul wrote it, and apparently was not ashamed of such shit. And talk about the Taliban today in Afghanistan refusing to respect the equal human rights of women. Millions of Christians in the U.S. believe the Bible is the inspired word of God. But the Bible puts women below men in many verses. If I were a woman, how in the hell would I feel? As a man, I support full, equal rights for women. I damn the Bible's many verses putting down women below men. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Servants, obey your masters in all things." Please your masters well in all things. More crazy shit from the Bible. He said, "Be obedient to your masters with fear and trembling." The Apostle Peter wrote, "Servants, be subject to your masters with all fear." Sadly, the Bible never once says slavery is always evil. Never once. So how in the hell can anybody who knows what the Bible says and doesn't say call the Bible a good book, a holy book? Many white masters in the South who bought, sold, and owned enslaved black people were faithful church members, going to church on Sunday and thanking God for the blessings God gave them, their fancy house, their enslaved people working their asses off to keep the white family living high on the hog. These church members believed God did not condemn slavery. Servants, obey your masters in all things, says the Bible. So, if the white master beats your black brother for learning to read, if the white master rapes your black mother, obey in all things your master. What would black women activists who risked their lives to take enslaved black people to freedom, black activists like Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, what would they say about this evil garbage in the Bible? In the Bible, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be, he said, are ordained of God. Were Roman emperors who threw Christians to the lions ordained of God? Were the Nazis that mass murdered millions of Jews, gypsies, gay men, communists, handicapped people ordained of God? Was the U.S. government that stole the homelands and mass murdered Native Americans ordained of God? Was the U.S. government that has murdered millions of people in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, dozens of other nations ordained of God? Absolutely evil bullshit in the Bible. And millions of U.S. Christians say the Bible is the inspired, infallible Word of God. Was Stalin ordained of God? Was Hitler ordained of God? Are the dozens of dictators, past and present, who torture and kill ordained of God? When two nations are mass murdering each other in war, are both governments ordained of God? In the Bible, Jesus called God Father dozens of times. Jesus said, "Your heavenly Father feeds the birds. Are you not of more value than the birds?" So Jesus is saying we can trust God to feed us. But think of the millions of people for thousands of years, people of all ages who have starved to death. Many of them begging God for help as their babies died of starvation. If Jesus said those words in the Bible, Jesus was severely out of touch with reality. False advertising for God. Jesus said, "Not one sparrow will fall to the ground without your Father's will. You are of more value than many sparrows." Are the many atrocities suffered by millions throughout history according to God the Father's will? Sadly, as a sincere young Christian preacher 56 years ago, I did not question deeply this poison crap in the Bible. Jesus said, "If you then who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good gifts to those who ask?" Sadly, false advertising for God. I swallowed it. I taught it. I preached it. And I thank many people who helped me open my eyes. It was a long, long journey. Not overnight, not by one book or one person. No, no, no. I wish we had a loving, fair, all-powerful parent God who helped all people who prayed for help. But all the wishing in the world does not make it true. If God did not hear and help millions in the Nazi concentration camps and those going into the gas chambers, why would I expect God to hear and help me? Many military veterans never admit to themselves or to others they were conned to become soldiers. And many people of whatever religion never admit to themselves or to others they were conned to become religious. In South Africa, after many years of bloody, cruel white supremacy against blacks, many meetings for truth and reconciliation took place across South Africa to speak the truth about the white people's tortures and murders of black people, and to help whites and blacks together to live as equals, finally, as neighbors, to stop the white evils toward blacks. And if white police confessed honestly in these truth and reconciliation meetings, if they confessed honestly the evils they had committed against blacks, they could avoid prosecution, avoid punishment in prison. And in one of these truth and reconciliation meetings in South Africa, one elderly black South African woman who had suffered terrible losses at the hands of a brutal white murderer under the racist white supremacy, she stood in an emotionally charged courtroom listening to a group of white police officers confess the atrocities they had perpetrated in the name of apartheid. And Officer Vanderbroek admitted, confessed, his personal responsibility in the death of this woman's son. Along with others, Vanderbroek shot her 18-year-old son at point-blank range. And the group partied while they burned his body, turning it over and over on the fire until it was completely reduced to ashes. And 8 years later, this same Vanderbroek and others arrived to collect her husband. A few years later, shortly after midnight, Vanderbroek again appeared, and he took the woman to a place beside a river, and on a wood pile, this woman's husband lay bound. And they forced her to watch as they poured gasoline over his body and ignited the flames that consumed his body. And the last words this black woman heard her husband say were, "Forgive them." And now, in this meeting, Vanderbroek stood before her, awaiting judgment. Vengeance seemed inevitable. The Truth and the Reconciliation Commission officers asked this woman, whose 18-year-old son and husband had been brutally murdered by Vanderbroek and others. They asked her what she wanted. "I want 3 things," she said calmly. "I want Mr. Vanderbroek to take me to the place where they burned my husband's body. I would like to gather up the dust and give him a decent burial. And second, Mr. Vanderbroek took all my family away from me. And I still have a lot of love to give. And twice a month, I would like for him to come to the ghetto and spend a day with me so I can be a mother to him. Third, I would like Mr. Vanderbrook to know that he is forgiven by God and that I forgive him too. And I would like someone to come and lead me by the hand to where Mr. Vanderbrook is, so that I can embrace him and he can know my forgiveness is real. As they led this elderly black woman across the silent courtroom, Vanderbrook fainted, overwhelmed. And in the courtroom, someone began singing Amazing Grace. And gradually, others joined in until finally everyone there was singing Amazing Grace. John Newton wrote the words of Amazing Grace. John Newton had been a brutal white slave trader, guilty of the kidnapping, the torture, the murder of many black people from Africa. But John Newton changed. He worked to abolish slavery of black people. He wrote Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And let me be clear, I no longer believe in God, but I know with help, with much help from others, we can wake up, we can change from our evil ways, and we can forgive our enemies. One U.S. soldier spoke out courageously and eloquently about the Iraq War. His name, Camilo Mejia. Camilo was imprisoned in Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma, for refusing to return to fight in Iraq. Mejia fought in Iraq from April to October 2003, eventually commanding an infantry squad. He and his squad were ordered to so-called soften up detainees at a center near the Baghdad airport. Camilo and the other soldiers were taught to keep prisoners awake by banging on metal walls with sledgehammers, and to frighten hooded prisoners by pulling the trigger of a gun near their heads. Camilo Mejia witnessed the killing of civilians and the use of excessive force in battle. And all of this troubled him at the time, but he found it difficult to sort out his thoughts. Camilo Mejia says, being at risk every second of my life made it very hard to put into perspective how I felt about the war and about being in the military. There was always a sense of emptiness in what we're doing, a certain spiritual pain every time we were attacked. But the tendency was always to find ways to stay alive and put away feelings about the war and its reasons. But in October 2003, while he was home on leave, Mejia had the opportunity to think seriously about his experiences in Iraq. Camilo says, "I've held a rifle to a man's face, a man on the ground, and in front of his mother, his children, his wife, and not knowing why I held that rifle. I've seen a soldier broken down inside because he killed a child. I admit that in Iraq there was the fear of being killed, but there was also the fear of killing innocent people, the fear of putting myself in a position where to survive means to kill. There was a fear of losing my soul in the process of saving my body. I was afraid of waking up one morning to realize my humanity had abandoned me." And finally, Camilo Mejia understood that he could not continue to participate in this war. He refused orders to return to Iraq as a U.S. soldier. "By putting my weapon down," he said, "I chose to reassert myself as a human being." Found guilty of desertion, he was sentenced to the maximum penalty, a year in prison. I strongly compliment this hero of conscience, Camilo Mejia. We enjoy using our hands to work, to garden, to play musical instruments, to prepare and eat meals, to pleasure our genitals, to make love with others. But if we pay federal income tax, we pay to destroy other people's hands in war. We enjoy seeing flowers, sunsets, trees, mountains, written words, loved ones, attractive bodies. But if we pay federal income tax, we pay to blind people in war. If we pay federal income tax, we pay to severely burn babies and to rip open the flesh of grandmas and grandpas. We enjoy walking, running, dancing, but if we pay federal income tax, we pay to tear apart the feet of children who will never run again. We enjoy having homes, our favorite clothes, treasured photos, special keepsakes, protection from the cold and storms, a place to feel safe with loved ones. But if we pay federal income tax, we pay to blow apart other people's homes. And this is what Lockheed Martin, Kirtland Air Force Base, Sandia Weapons Lab, Los Alamos Weapons Lab, and federal income tax are about. The maiming, the mutilation, the making homeless, the murder of multitudes of our sisters and brothers in other countries. The main purpose of the U.S. empire is to make sure that most people in the United States, especially the large corporations and the filthy rich elite, keep stealing and hogging the wealth of this world. The United States routinely supports bloody regimes in other nations, bloody dictators who bow to Wall Street and the U.S. Pentagon, allowing U.S.-based corporations to rob their nation's masses of their resources and their labor. The U.S. empire is the enemy under both Republican and Democrat presidents, the enemy of genuine democracy, justice, freedom, and human rights in dozens of nations. A good way to refuse to pay federal income tax, to rob, to terrorize, to paralyze, to cripple, to blind, to torture, to make homeless and murder our sisters and brothers with no fines and no threats from the U.S. government is to live simply below the federal income taxable level. I have lived well for many years below the federal income taxable level. And last year, 2022, for a single person over 65, the federal income taxable level was $14,700. About 1/3 of federal income tax goes for U.S. wars, past wars, present wars, future wars, and for nuclear weapons. Bee pollen is a rich source of protein and vitamin B12. Bee pollen contains almost all of the vitamins, the minerals, and the other nutrients we need. Bee pollen is one of nature's most completely nourishing foods. Bee pollen is tiny pellets. And if you're just starting bee pollen, eat only one tiny pellet to see if you're allergic to bee pollen, if you get a rash, wheezing, or any other reaction. If you get no reaction, gradually increase to at least 1 teaspoon per day or more. I take 1 or 2 teaspoons 3 or 4 times per day. Buy bee pollen from a local beekeeper. Bee pollen is good for energy, endurance, living long. Bee pollen is good for recovery from a long-time illness and reducing cravings for booze and other drugs. Bee pollen is good for building new blood, preventing colds, flu, and other contagious diseases. Bee pollen prevents and treats cancer, protects against radiation. Bee pollen is good for hay fever, AIDS, allergies, depression. Bee pollen strengthens the immune system. Good for bronchitis, hepatitis, rheumatism, fatigue, headaches. Good sex for men and women. Bee pollen is good for hemorrhoids, anemia, acne, digestive problems. Good for asthma and both diarrhea and constipation. Bee pollen is good for prostate infection and prostate enlargement. I highly recommend bee pollen from local bee keepers. And that the Fairgrounds Flea Market there are 2 local beekeepers who are my friends. Most people have no problem with allergies to bee pollen, but be sure to check first by taking 1 tiny pellet to see if you get any reactions. The 4 white killers many people eat are white sugar, white flour, salt, and lard. And these 4 white killers, white sugar, white flour, salt, lard, cause diabetes, fat bodies, cancer, heart trouble, alcoholism. Diabetes was almost unknown among Native Americans before the European invasion. Fry bread is not traditional Native American food. Fry bread is reservation food. Made first in the 1800s from the white killers' white flour and lard, the U.S. government gave Indian people. Fry bread is slow poison, no matter how good it tastes. Many, many years ago, I ate some fry bread. Fry bread causes diabetes, fat bodies, cancer, heart trouble, alcoholism. And parents never reward your children with sugar shit. Candy, ice cream, sodas, cake, cookies, pie, donuts. And this sugar shit is poison. Slow poison, but it's poison. And when parents reward kids with sugar, many of those kids grow up connecting sweets with their parents' approval. And as adults, they feel no meal is complete without sugar dessert. As adults, when they feel depressed or lonely, they reach for sugar shit. Feed your children only healthy, raw plant foods plus bee pollen. No meat, no dairy, no cooked food, no sodas, no junk food, no sugar shit. Help them to live healthy and enjoy their bodies, enjoy life. I warmly thank Mark and Eddie and Travis for their excellent help dozens of times running the cameras and controls for this program. And thanks to all of you watching. If you see me walking on the street or at some event here in Albuquerque, I invite you to talk with me if you want to. To your health, my fresh piss, which I have drunk every day since November 10th, 1999. Good night.
Tell all you love that you love them so, because even if you do, they might not know, and one day we'll all be gone. Taste the wind, don't let it blow on by. Sing songs of love, let the music get you high. And when it's said and done, you'll know the sun will shine on. And when it's said and done, you'll know the sun will shine on. And when it's said and done, you'll know the sun will shine on.